Hello, my name is Kay Hartman, one of the Budget Advocates co-chairs. Glenn Bailey, the other co-chair, and I welcome you to today's town hall, Thoughts on the Mayor's Proposed Budget. To discuss the budget that was just released Monday, April 22nd, we have Deputy Chief Controller Rick Cole and Budget Advocate Jack Humphreville. They've both been studying the budget since Monday when it first saw the light of day. The questions you asked in your event registration have been shared with Rick and Jack. I want to give you a brief reminder that Rick and Jack did not make the budget. The budget comes from the mayor's office and then goes to the city council for amendment and approval. If you want to comment on the budget, please submit your thoughts to Council File 24-0600. The budget hearings conducted by the City Council Budget, Finance, and Innovation Committee begin April 30th and run through May 8th. You can make public comment about the budget on May 1st. So Glenn, why don't you take it from there?
Thank you, Kay. This session is being recorded and it will be posted on the Budget Advocates website, www.budgetadvocates.org. In addition to which, we have enabled the Q&A feature on Zoom. And so any questions to our speakers, Jack and Rick, we'd ask if you please put this in Q&A. We also have opened up chat, and if you had any technical issues or comments that would go to us as the co-hosts, but we would ask if you'd please put any questions in the Q&A so we don't miss them. There will be, after the thoughts presented by Jack and Rick, then we will have the Q&A session at the end of the session. We also want to make sure that everyone is aware that the annual Neighborhood Council Budget Day will be held this year in person on Saturday, June 15th, in the morning. It will be held at City Hall as usual. We're working on the details now, but it's usually an 8 till 12:30, 1 p.m. time frame. Over the years, we've had the mayor, the city controller, the chair of the City Council Budget and Finance and Innovation Committee, the CAO, president of the City Council, and the last several years, we've had panel conversations with folks both in and out of city government. It's always an exciting day, and we hope you'll put that on your calendar. After the plenary and panel discussions, we do have our breakout sessions by region, where each of the regions will identify the city services and budget issues that are important to them. And we will be electing for the next 2-year term, the new budget advocates, so 36 budget advocates spread out over the 12 regions, 3 per region. So please put Saturday, June 15th on your calendar. This is our most expensive event of the year, although we do have many other activities during the year in our regular business. And it is totally funded at this time by contributions from neighborhood councils such as yours. And although we haven't been able to accept contributions during the past few years, we are pleased to announce that in cooperation with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and the city clerk, the contribution form has been updated, and neighborhood councils may now make contributions to a new category called Neighborhood Council Budget Day. And that's how the checks are made payable. So we would ask every neighborhood council to please agendize that on your next upcoming board meeting agenda, and consider making a contribution of $500 or $1,000 or whatever you feel comfortable with. Right now, we do have one neighborhood council that's donated $2,000. And just note that for this fiscal year, the deadline to submit payment requests, the check requests, is June 1st. Otherwise, it'll open up again after July 1. During this meeting, we will put into chat the link to that form. And with that, we will now
Glenn,
yes?
Glenn, we do have Vincent has joined us from the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. So Vincent, would you like to say a few words?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think John Darnell was going to do.
Okay, well, he's not here.
Oh, okay, because he had a little speech prepared, and I
Well,
think
he's
he
not
want.
here. Okay. So do
But
you want to,
yeah, basically, we're here to support you. You know, we are looking to do a budget 101 for a lot of the groups, that are looking to get more information and possibly participate in the process. And I will reach out to you and get a little bit more information. But we look forward to supporting you in every single segment for the upcoming budget day on June 15th. And anything that we can do, of course, we're here for you.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. And maybe we could, if John joins later, we could put him at the end, maybe if he had anything else he wanted to announce. Vincent, if you'll coordinate that with John. So we were just waiting to see what the Dunn report included. So I have a little bit of an update that may be of interest. It's not budget related per se, but just for those that may not have heard, on Thursday, Mayor Karen Bass appointed a new general manager for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. Her name is Carmen Chang, and there is a council file open on that. It's council file 24-0465, and the appointment has been scheduled to be heard by the City Council Neighborhoods and Community Enrichment Committee on Wednesday morning, and then that recommendation then goes to the full City Council. So we wanted you to be aware of that, and later on during the meeting, we will put into chat the link to that council file. You can certainly weigh in as individuals because obviously it's short notice before then for for a neighborhood council to get on an agenda and file a community impact statement. So with those announcements out of the way, would like to have our panelists start and start with Jack Humphreville, followed by Rick Cole. Thank you. Jack, you're muted. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Jack Humphreville. I'm the budget representative from the department, from the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. And I'm also a budget advocate, and I have been one for a number of years. And over the last, I guess, probably 10 or 15 years, I've written a number of articles for City Watch involving the city's budget. Rick?
Rick Cole. I'm the Chief Deputy Controller, which means in the Controller's office, I'm number 2, along with our Chief of Staff, to the elected Controller, Kenneth Mejia.
Go ahead, Jack, with your thoughts.
Okay. Well, I guess my first set of thoughts gets into the thing of, how did we get into this situation? And it turns out that this year has been, sort of I think the LA Times called it a fiscal mess. And what's behind that is, two factors. One is that revenues were about $180 million, according to the CAO, below budget. Just the economy and the, basic 7 economically sensitive taxes just didn't perform. I think the second part of it was over expenditures, and that has 2 areas. One is the labor contracts, primarily with the police, and to a lesser extent with the civilian unions. And the other thing is that there were a number of cost overruns in various departments, including the fire department. We also had a situation with what they call liability claims. And that went from, they budgeted, I think, 87 million, and it looks like it's over 250 million. So, I think, a lot of that is a result of the previous city attorney. Probably the best way to look at this, or sort of see the damage, is at the beginning of the fiscal year 23-24. I think the reserve fund was like $658 million. I think that was around 7.5, 8% of the general fund budget, which was pretty good. That does not include the budget stabilization fund. The problem today, the budget, the reserve fund is $400 million, and that had to be augmented by $25 million. So the reserve fund basically went down $285 million, which probably financed a big chunk of the deficit. Quite frankly, I think there may be some more over expenditures or lower revenues, but that time will tell on that one. But it basically means that we don't have a reserve fund that can absorb any hits in this upcoming budget. In terms of the upcoming budget, a lot has been said about it, but I mean, and I think there's some over exaggerations in that revenues, are actually going to be up, but they're only going to be up by about 1%, which is about a couple $100 million lower than what the city was projecting. So of 8.1, I think Rick is coming in at, 7.8 when you take out the money that came from the reserve fund. So from continuing revenues, it's off about $300 million. So I think to get the balance of the budget, I think the city's done a very good job of under very tough circumstances. I salute the mayor in that I think, and I think Rick, you guys had something to do with it, as well as the CAO, in terms of eliminating all these vacancies. I mean, that's something I think that should have been done a long time ago, but that's easier said than done. But in order to balance the budget, there's been a significant reduction in the number of positions, which I think saved, 150 to $200 million, of which a good chunk of that comes from the general fund. But there's also monies that came from cutting the capital expenditures, expense account reductions, special fund realignments, savings from the police department and some of their unfilled positions. And so the city's going to be going to have to work through that. I think the expenditures for the departments are about the same. I think they're a little north of $5 billion, and maybe I think the expenditure for the departments are up about $100 million. But while the revenues, the expenditures are up, I don't know, a lot of that's going to be people expenditures as opposed to let's say and that means there's just not going to be as many people providing services for it, whether it's whether it's fixing the streets or the sidewalks or the planning department or all these various areas that are providing the services. So we're going to have what I will call a service deficit, which is and we oftentimes wonder how every year we always we're Cassandra, we're crying we're going to go broke. But I think what's happened is over time you've had a diminution of services year after year after year, and it's a little bit. I mean, it's not like the city's going to go broke, but it's just chipping away at the level of services that we would expect. Street cleaning is one of these things. My neighborhood, we used to get it once a week. Now we get it once every 2 weeks. I think another area that is concerning to me is not only this year, but the next 4 or 5 years. In the press conference that the mayor had on the 22nd on last Monday, one of the city officials said, we should be financially sustainable by 2029. And that was based on the 4-year budget outlook that showed a surplus, I think, of $86 million. But that's just not the case, because once again, in terms of developing these forecasts, they don't make any assumptions for future labor contracts. I mean, that's what's happened this year, or that's what happened last year. Nobody put any money in for it, and all of a sudden, I don't want to say we were surprised, but we get nailed. And so, from my perspective, we have to, and I could be wrong here. I may be double counting. It's just very obtuse to me. But we're going to have raises for the firefighters that are going to start at the beginning of next year, July 1, 2025. July 1, 24, July 1st, 24. And that's going to go, I assume that was $25 million a year. We're going to have the cops that are going to be renewed in 2028. And that's not, I just made a guess, that's going to be $100 million. And in, in 2029, we're going to have the civilian unions that are going to be renegotiated. And that's probably another 50 for a half year. It'd be 100 for a full year. So as opposed to having a surplus of 86 million, let's call it 100 million, we're going to have a shortfall of 300 million. So that's a fairly significant swing $400 million with regards to all these labor contracts. And I think, that from my perspective calls for reform, or some kind of reform. And, I mean, I have my own ideas. The first one would be, cities not allowed to enter into any contract. They pass an ordinance or put something on the ballot that there's no deficits, and that the other thing would be open labor negotiations. Now, I think the controller, Kenneth Mejia, has come up with, I thought, some excellent ones. Maybe Rick, let me steal your thunder a little bit, but I mean, well, back when I read the annual comprehensive financial report, I thought I was seeing things. Kenneth had a little memo up front. And, it called for several reforms, one being, let's develop a 5-year plan for financial sustainability. That's pretty logical. They want to have 2-year budget, but, 2-year budgeting cycles, which is very common. Not only did Mejia do this, but I think the LA 2020 Commission a number of years ago, they suggested 3 years. And I think a number of cities and counties, do multiple year budgeting. I think another one is that Mejia called for a serious capital improvement plan. From my perspective, I think that's very important, because one of the big liabilities I think the city has is the deferred maintenance budget, on our streets and our sidewalks and our buildings and our parks and things along those lines. So to get a better handle on it. I think another great one was they said, let's have a chief financial officer, somebody to oversee the finances of the city. I think the budget advocates called for a city manager. The LA 2020 Commission said we want an office of transparency and accountability, but it's somebody sort of overseeing, how the money's going. And I think the final one is that the controller mentioned was a participatory budgeting, where the people can get, people like us, and I mean us, everybody on this phone call, neighborhood councils, can be involved in, having some input on the decisions. So, I mean, we're gonna start these budget hearings for the Budget and Finance Committee, I think early next week. And I think that's just sort of a charade, because the difference between the proposed budget and the adopted budget, I think over the last 10 years, the way I calculate, was an average of 0.06%. So, I think this thing's already pretty much cast in stone in our ability to influence it. But I think that the city's got a, rough couple. I think this is going to be a very telling year. I think there's going to be issues in this budget that are going to blow up. One of them being, let's say, the liability claims. Last year there were 250, and they budgeted, this year only 87 million. The cops will probably just go above that number. You have, a number of other areas where, they're relying on ULA, the excess, the tax on property sales more than $5 million, and whether that's going to survive the taxpayer accountability ballot measure. It's going to be another question. I think the city's also has seen over expenditures, every year, whether it's the fire department, police department, or just general over expenditures over plan. So I think we're going to have a very interesting year. One positive thing is that Mayor Bass has indicated that when this budget season is over, she is going to conduct an audit, on all the city departments. I think Kenneth has been calling for something like that also. But, this is, from sort of ground zero, basically, what's your mission? Are you effective? What's your staffing? What's your financing? And I hopefully they take it from ground zero. I think, what do they call it? Zero-based budgeting or something along those lines. But, go in there and say, okay, what's your mission? And in the past, everybody's gone out and say, well, this is what my budget was last year, and then they sort of tinker around with it as opposed to really, going into it. So, on that note, Rick, I'll turn it over to you. I'm sorry for rambling on for so long, but that's nothing new and different.
Jack, thank you. And let me begin by acknowledging that you have been writing about these issues and advocating on these issues for a long time. I think that the current crisis, which is not happening because we've had an earthquake, it's not happening because we've had a national recession, it's not happening because of some external crisis. This is the culmination of things you've been writing about, talking about, advocating around for a number of years. And the fact that if we acknowledge that politically, you and I come from diverse places, that there's an important through line, whether you lean to the left, lean to the right, or are in the radical middle. Living within your means is a basic principle that that has bad impacts, whether you lean right, lean left, or in the middle. And we've been under investing and overspending within the framework of the revenue that the city generates. And you can do that for a while. You can do that for a long time by robbing Peter to pay Paul. But there was an economist, actually a Republican economist, Herb Klein, who served two of our presidents. And the first time he warned his bosses, he said, you know, things that are unsustainable have a tendency to come to a stop. And that causes people to sort of think, well, what does that exactly mean? So he said, well, let me make it simple. Things that can't go on forever don't go on forever. And I think the fact that we're in this spot of a budget, a very difficult budget for the next 4 years forecast, without an external cause, indicates that we're very close to that that end of really having to rethink the way we spend our money. So let me begin. Budgets can get very technical. It's very easy for those of us who've been in government to begin spouting acronyms and phrases that don't have any ordinary meaning to ordinary people, like the general fund or enterprise funds or community development block grant funds, or these things can get very technical very quickly. So let me just start with an image, and all metaphors are, of course, imperfect. The city government is not an iceberg, but in some ways it looks like an iceberg, in the sense that we all know that 90% of an iceberg is below the waterline. That is, that when you see an iceberg, what you see is only about 10% of what's actually there. Most of it is under the water. You don't see it unless you dive down underneath the surface. And so for the public, for the press, and even for most of the elected officials, what they see is that part that's above the water. And almost nobody looks below the waterline and sees how much of the budget is simply embedded. As Jack was suggesting earlier, if you're only changing 0.6% of the budget after 20 hours of marathon hearings and intense grilling of bureaucrats who were in the hot seat and very earnest council members asking the hard questions, if at the end of that whole lengthy and intense process, which includes sometimes even hundreds of people testifying over the course of those couple of weeks, if you're only changing it by 0.6%, that means 99.4% of that iceberg is untouched. You're just really tinkering at the edges. So what Jack has just suggested, which is a zero-based budget, is let's drain the water so we can see the whole thing. We can see the whole iceberg and think about how much we're not paying attention to as we get wound around the axle. Now, that's hard because the part that's above that's a lot of money for ordinary people, right? So last year, probably 75 or 100 people came from one neighborhood wearing, I think, yellow t-shirts, may have been red t-shirts, I don't remember. There are things called family source centers in Los Angeles. They provide a range of services for predominantly low-income families, and it's a sort of a one-stop place to get help. It seems to be a good idea, and for whatever reason, one of these was not recommended for funding. Now, maybe it was a budget issue. Maybe it was somebody thought, those people really aren't doing a good job, so we'll say that we don't have enough money and we'll cut them off. Who knows? I can't see below the waterline on that, but it did make the people who rely on that family source center, that made them very angry, and they got organized and they printed up their t-shirts and they came down, and guess what? They got their way. Well, that's a couple $1,000,000, right? And to that neighborhood, to keep that that center open and provide those services, and that's a big deal. And so for them, they had an impact on the budget. But that's just the people who do this professionally, they call that budget dust. In other words, it's not even, it's like a rounding error. It's such a tiny portion of the budget, $1 million here, $1 million there. That, remember, the total budget is 12.8 billion. That means that 1.2 billion is 10%. That means 128 million is 1%. That means 12.8 million, which seems like a lot of money to us. That's 1/10 of 1%, right? So you have to keep in mind there's a lot of zeros behind these big numbers. So the first thing that I want to just lay out is this is a big budget, big numbers, and most of it we don't pay any attention to. It's almost invisible. The second thing is I don't really need to give this speech to the people on this call, but it's the speech we have to all give to the 4 million people in Los Angeles who are not on this call, which is that they don't even have to leave their house to be affected by the budget, right? When they flip on the electricity, that's the DWP. When they flush the toilet, that's the Department of Water and Power. When they venture out onto the sidewalk, that's the Department of Street Services. When you get in your car or get on a bike or just walk your dog and cross the street, that's a whole bunch of other departments that get involved. The street lights, the street signs, the traffic signals, let alone the water pipes and the parks and the libraries and the fire trucks and the garbage trucks and all of the things that we rely on in a community. Those decisions are made at City Hall in the budget and affect your everyday life every day of the year around the clock. So that's why we need to pull in a lot more than 45 people to this discussion in a city of 4 million people. That's why my boss, Kenneth Mejia, advocates for participatory budgeting. So with that background of that, we mostly don't pay attention to the vast majority of the budget, and that we should. Let me repeat a few of the things. I won't repeat them at length that Jack has said, because I agree with him. And then one area where we disagree, and we'll probably have a chance to talk about that in a couple of moments. $12.8 billion budget, less than last year, and because of the huge, and that's bigger than the general fund. So some of the numbers that Jack was using was just the general fund, which is a part of that bigger $12.8 billion budget. And the general fund, parentheses here, is what we mostly pay attention to. It's where the police budget is, the fire budget is, the parks budget, etc. But it doesn't include a lot of the things that also are important to us, like the gas tax money that goes to fix our roads, right? That's not in the general fund, but that's part of that 12.8 billion. So it's less. And if there's one thing you should know, it's there will be, and Jack said this, there will be fewer people, paid better, uh, and that will have an impact on the services that you enjoy and rely on. It will be visible. It will not be undetectable. The mayor's made the case that because those jobs are now vacant, getting rid of them won't have any impact. As we go through today, I appreciate the mayor's hope for that, but that's not a hope that's going to be possibly fulfilled because there's literally too few people to do the same amount of work that's being done today. And we'll talk more about why that is. So 3 things, and then I think Jack and I are going to have a chance to both ask each other questions and then answer your questions, both the ones that have been submitted in advance as well as the ones that you put in the chat. First thing is, yes, we saw this coming. If you go back to the January letter that Kenneth Mejia, our controller, wrote as the introduction to the audit that we do, the financial audit that we do every year, it's called the All Funds Comprehensive Report. And that every city has to do that. Every city has to report that to the state government. It's public record. It's on our website. It's on the state's website. And it's independently audited by an accounting firm, or actually a couple of accounting firms that partner together. And the controller writes the introduction. And in that, we pointed to 4 factors that Jack has also mentioned that we saw already happening at a time when City Hall was patting itself on the back and saying, we have a record level of reserves. The budget is balanced. We have $250 million of new money for homelessness to launch the mayor's signature program of Inside Safe. So at the same time that people were saying all of that happy talk, the controller's letter said, well, there are 4 things on the horizon that we need to be paying attention to. One is that we've had a huge, big increase in revenue because of federal money from COVID and because we had a strong rebound of the economy. The economy was really tanked because so many restaurants and hotels and businesses were closed. That had a huge impact on city revenue. It came roaring back because stores and restaurants and hotels opened up and people started shopping and going out to dinner and going to concerts and spending money. And we got a bunch of federal money to make up for the deep hit that our budget had taken in the previous 2 years of the pandemic. So last year was a great year. And we said, that's not going to keep going. We're not going to come roaring back because we've already come roaring back. And in fact, we're going to have relatively anemic growth because the comeback has been so sharp. The second thing we said is what Jack has said, that we've got contracts coming up and people are going to get raises. They're going to get raises because A, it's inflationary times. B, unions have been successful in the private sector at raising wages. C, we have a lot of vacancies and we need to recruit to fill those vacancies. D, we have a very pro-labor council. It's a no-brainer to conclude that there were going to be pretty significant increases in the cost of labor. And you could see that coming. We didn't know how much it would be, but we knew that there would be an increase. The third factor that we pointed to is that the organization has been starved for years. You go to City Hall, it's a beautiful building, but if you go into the cubicles, they look like they haven't been switched out since the 1980s. You go into a Fortune 500 company, and it looks like it's 2024. You go into a government office in the city of Los Angeles, and it looks like it's 1984. And that's just the visible part. The computers are not, and technology and software that runs those computers is often out of date. The training budget has been slashed going back 20 years, and so we do very little training of our people, and yet they have very challenging jobs. Everything from running animal shelters to producing, great things at the library 7 days a week. And we don't train people to run this giant city that serves 4 million people and covers 400 square miles and is evolving rapidly. And so the average person on this call, you can pick up one of these, and if you say, well, I wonder if you need my water heater just died. I wonder if I need a permit to get a new water heater. You can spend 20 minutes poking around trying to figure that out, and if you ever do figure it out, you'll find that you're supposed to download a PDF and print it out and fill it out and then fax it back and then come down to City Hall and collect your permit. But we know that if we wanted something from Amazon, with 3 clicks, we could have it delivered to us tomorrow. So government's fallen behind the times, and that makes us less efficient, makes people more frustrated. And we also haven't invested in our infrastructure. And it costs a lot more to fix something that's broken than it is to preventively maintain it. And we've stopped preventively maintaining so much of our infrastructure. The very most expensive way to trim a tree is for Mrs. Smith to call up Councilmember X. Councilmember X call up the Department of Street Services. Department of Street Services says, oh yeah, we'll put it on a list. And they send a crew out to trim Mrs. Smith's tree. And that Councilmember X gets her vote next time, right? That the system worked for Councilmember X and for Mrs. Smith. But that is the most expensive way to trim trees. And if it takes you 50 years to trim trees the regular way, which is to come through and trim all the trees on one street efficiently and effectively, you're going to spend way more money fixing, trimming that tree and the same thing with potholes. Mayor said we filled more potholes last year than we ever have. That is not a success. That means we had more potholes than we've ever had before. And filling them is incredibly expensive. To send a crew out with hot asphalt to 3 guys to fill one pothole and then go drive around the block and fill another pothole, versus coming through every 4 or 5 years and slurry sealing the asphalt so you don't get potholes. That's much cheaper. So the third piece is we've not invested in our people, and the fourth thing is we haven't invested in our things. And so that catches up to you after a while if people aren't well trained. Big challenge for us in the controller's office is we're in charge of payroll. We're in charge of paying all the city's bills. We're in charge of keeping track of all the money, all $12.8 billion of it. And there are people in each department that are spending money, running up bills. They're keeping track of the payroll. They haven't been trained to do this. They haven't been trained on the technology. So they come and ask, can you train us? And we say, well, we would love to, except we're so busy keeping up because we have a 17% vacancy. We don't have time to train you. Sorry. And so people make mistakes. People are inefficient. Things don't get paid on time. We end up paying a penalty sometimes when we don't pay on time. These are all things that are we know these things. These are not mysteries. We knew them a year ago, January, and they're now catching up to us. And that's why we have a budget crisis. And that's why I agree with Jack on 2 things. The mayor has done a good job of doing a balanced budget. It's not a fake balanced budget. These cuts are real. There's no gimmicks in the budget. And that's to be commended. And she has committed herself, after the budget is done, to a more comprehensive long-term approach to putting our fiscal house in order. Where I disagree with the mayor and with Jack is eliminating 2,000 vacancies just because they happen at this moment to be vacant is not the best way to right-size our government. Because we have critical positions, for example, just for us, and I don't mean to say that we're the most important, but I know us best. We have two people who are in charge of the city's accounting. That means that they close the books. So we found out exactly how much we spent last year so that we can account for it. And so we can put all the money from the new budget into the right accounts so that everybody's got ability to spend money. That's what they do at the end of the year. They work with our auditors to make sure we produce all the receipts and all of the printouts and explain all of the anomalies. Both these people have worked for the city for 30 years. They've retired at more or less the same time. We cannot fill those vacancies. We were turned down by the Priority Critical Hiring Committee, and those vacancies are being eliminated. So we're not going to have somebody in charge of those things. We lost 60 years of experience, and we can't replace them. That's short-sighted. Do we need to have fewer people if we're going to pay them well and not have additional revenue? Well, the math is pretty brutal. But let's be careful about which positions go away, and let's not just lop them off arbitrarily. So with those opening comments, there's lots more to talk about and lots more to address in terms of what you care about or what you would like to know about. And so we can either start with some Q&A, or Jack, if you want to challenge any of the things I've said or add to them, I turn the floor back over to you. Yep, you're on mute again, Jack. The classic Zoom challenge.
Yeah, we have a gardener across the street who's using one of those gas-fired monsters. I think, Rick, how many years were you with the Garcetti? That's when we first met. I think you were in charge of the budget 5, 6 years ago.
I no more than that. It's 10 years have passed. I
Yeah.
came in the first year of the Garcetti administration in 2013. We faced about a $265 million deficit we had to close on our watch. We presented a balanced budget. In those days, the mayor took office at a different time of the year. So we owned the budget from the beginning. Mayor came in July 1 and I came in a few days later. And so we presented the budget as Mayor Bass has in April. She, of course, came in December. So her first budget was really Mayor Garcetti's last budget. This is really her first budget. I was there for 2 years as deputy mayor for budget and innovation. That was
I guess maybe one of the things we ought to do is, Kay, I don't know how you want to do it. Take some questions, or how would you like to do that?
I can read off some questions. I can read off some questions if you'd like. So we're getting some questions from the Q&A. We also have some questions that were submitted with the registration. So one question we have is about LAPD and the cost of civil litigation. And I mean, how do we address this in the budget? I know Jack put an answer in the Q&A, but I thought it might be good to have some conversation about it.
Sure. And that's, I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit. I praised and I stand by it overall that the mayor's budget is a solid one in terms of it really is balanced. We can disagree about how it got there, but it is balanced. that is one area where I do think the budget is not accurate. For the last 3 years, we've budgeted $87 million to pay for lawsuit settlements and lawsuit judgments against the city. Someone trips and falls on a sidewalk to the LAPD, sets off fireworks and destroys a block of a neighborhood. Everything in between, all kinds of claims against the city, including very expensive. I think it was a $21 million settlement just recently for a street lamp that was defective and fell and injured or killed. I'm not certain. Injured a resident. $21 million. That's a quarter of what we've been budgeting each of the last 4 years. Last year, not this year. Last year was 160 million in liability outflow, This year, as Jack said, it could be as high as 250. We don't think it'll be quite that high, but it's well over 200. And next year they're budgeting again 87, as if suddenly the flow of lawsuits is gonna diminish. I think that's unrealistic.
One of the things about the liability claims is the city looks at it in one big bucket as opposed to allocating it to departments. And a number of people have suggested that it be part of the departmental budget. So for the, of the 250 million, at least in the proposed budget book, 105 was related to the police department. Well, if they had to pay that out of their budget, I think they might be a little bit, might take this a little bit more seriously. I'm not saying they don't take it seriously, but when it comes out of the budget, that's directly out of their budget as opposed to being a related cost. So
And the way to do that, Jack, which other cities do, in the cities that I've worked in, that's been a standard practice, is it's like insurance, right? If you have a lot of claims, then it's amortized, and it becomes part of your budget. So it isn't like that bill comes to you that year. It's that there's a formula for how much over time you're racking up in the way, and if that number goes up, it's because it's gone up in terms of the claims that are paid out. So it doesn't, you're not suddenly hit with a $50 million bill you've got to pay this year, but it means next year you're going to be paying essentially what's called higher premium, and that gives the opportunity for that department to think, wow, I'm paying for this stuff. If I could figure out a way to reduce it, then I would get credit for it. My budget, I would have more money in my budget because I wouldn't be spending it on liability claims, and that can incentivize people to be preventive in their approach to these problems.
I guess one quick thought, not that they're doing, is will there be any judgment obligation bonds, to help pay for that? And they've done that in the past. Whether they're going to do it in the future or not, I don't know. But that might be, that's a little bit like insurance, in that you pay it out over time. But usually, I think these judgment obligation bonds can't be more than 10 years. Lionel asked a question: is there any plans to cut the LAPD budget? And I think the answer to that one is the budget this year is going to be about almost $2 billion, up 7.4%. And I don't think, with Mayor Bassis, wanting to, increase the number of officers, I think that whatever it is, 9,100, 9,500, you're going to need money to do that. So you're not going to have a decrease in the budget.
It's actually worse than that, Jack.
Okay.
We're going to be paying more for fewer officers next year because of the raises entered into last year, or in this current year, excuse me.
One of the other things
we're going to be paying $1 billion over the next 4 years, over and above what we were paying before the contract. So we will have fewer officers, and we'll be paying more salaries.
Right.
So the budget is up. And by the way, there are two numbers for every department. And this is unique to the city of Los Angeles so far as I know. Most cities, just as they include some formula for liability claims and settlements in department budgets, because the departments are the ones who are generating those liability claims and judgments. They also include the pension and the benefits in the department budget. We only include the salaries in department budgets. We don't include the pensions and the vast majority of employee benefits in that budget. So there's really two numbers for the police department. There's the $2 billion, which doesn't include any pensions or the vast majority of their medical and dental and what have you benefits. The actual number for the police department is $3.4 billion. And that's true of all the departments. All the departments have two budgets. One is what they call an operating budget, and then there's a separate line item for health and benefits, health benefits and other things, and a separate line item for pensions. By the way, that separate line item for pensions is not labeled pensions. It's labeled Okay.
related.
But because we borrow that money because it's a one-time payment to the pension systems. It's under the name of the borrowing.
It's under the
Yes.
tax and revenue anticipation notes.
Yes, tax
Yeah.
revenue anticipation notes. So if you want to know how much we're spending on pensions, you have to know the language, and you look under trans, and you'll find how much we spend on pensions.
So while we're talking about the LAPD, a question came in from the registrations. Lake Balboa Neighborhood Council is against cutting the budget for LAPD's Air Support Division, Council File 23-1422. What is your opinion and why?
Well, we did an audit this year of air support. We have 17 helicopters. It's the largest municipal helicopter fleet in America. There are some obvious reasons why our police department uses air support. It's a big city. It's a spread out city. Our audit determined that the police really couldn't point to any hard data that showed that it reduced crime. So they of course dispute that, but they couldn't really produce any hard data to prove that. They just, well, it stands to reason, if we have helicopters up there, we have eyes in the skies, that's going to be good. And so people have opinions. But a question is always in budgeting, compared to what? Don't cut that. Okay, fine. What do you want to cut instead? Right. And that's the part of the disconnect with folks when it comes to budgeting, because there's the old Lord Acton, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The opposite is true too. Powerlessness corrupts, and absolute powerlessness corrupts absolutely. So if you feel you have no power, you say, well, don't cut that. And by the way, don't raise my taxes. And by the way, don't raise my trash fees. And then so something has to give, right? And then when that gives, then somebody else says, oh, wait a minute, don't cut that, or don't raise that. So it's fine that people don't want to cut the police helicopters. They're absolutely entitled to that opinion. The question is then, what would they cut? And how valuable out of a $3.4 billion budget is that $42 million we're spending on police helicopters? And the amount of money we spend on police helicopters is bigger than, I think, 6 or 8 departments in the city. So again, people are entitled to an opinion.
Yeah.
The question is, what's the implications of that opinion?
Okay. So another question, this one from the Q&A. If liability is such an issue, why is the mayor locking in fewer staff for street services that will just perpetuate potholes and broken sidewalks?
Well, it'd be the mayor who would be best able to answer that. I think she's had to make some very hard decisions, and we share that concern in the controller's office. But people say, well, then what's your plan? And we don't have the responsibility. And so again, our job is to show what are some of the implications, right? If you cut this, what happens to that? If you add to this, where do you get that money from? We think that's valuable. We hope that's valuable. And we're always open to suggestions about how to be more valuable in doing that. But ultimately, that's not a decision of the city controller. It's a decision of the mayor and the council, and they have to ask those hard questions. And sometimes, for a variety of reasons, governments make penny wise and pound foolish decisions. Part of which is the public is more concerned. Typically, the vocal public, the ones they hear from, are more concerned about things that you can see today than what lies down the road. So that's why we end up kicking the can down the road. So we stop fixing stuff, and then we end up paying for it in liability claims later.
Yeah.
At least the budget balance in the short run.
Yeah, the street services budget's being cut by about 13%. I don't know, about $30 million. So that's obviously going to impact, the level of services that they can perform. Whether it's filling potholes or fixing streets and things along those lines. And one of the problems you have here is that that money is going to be divided by 15. Every council member wants their fair share, so to speak. Whereas, some council districts may have just many more streets. Let's say if probably go up to Sunland to some of the less densely populated, they have more streets. But I would argue that, Hollywood, which has, probably more people per square mile than any part of the city, their streets, they could use a little bit more help. So you have the politics of it and all those types of things. So I think the other thing with street services is, you drive around town, you see the street crews doing it. There's always seems to be a lot of guys just hanging out, just scratching their butts. And I think that's sort of, you just sort of look at that and you say, am I getting the bang for the buck? So, Kay, do you have some more questions?
We've got zillions.
Okay.
Here's one. What mechanisms are available to make up the structural deficit by increasing revenue rather than cutting services?
Sure. Well, there's
Taxes.
there's two ways to grow revenue. One is taxes or fees, which are, they feel like taxes if you're paying them. And then the other is to grow the economy, right? And grow the businesses and the incomes of the people in your city, so they have more money to spend, and you get more sales tax, or you have more visitors and you get more hotel tax, or you have more business and you get more business tax. And a clean city, a city that is not racked by a homelessness crisis, a city that is not so bureaucratic and difficult to start or maintain a business, a city that's well-rounded in culture and parks and things like that. Those cities tend to be more prosperous, and they generate a higher level of revenue. I think we see that in surrounding cities. The cities that are really strapped have a hard time getting out of that. The Southgates, the Bell Gardens, they don't have amenities, and businesses are not likely to locate there. Beverly Hills has money coming out of their ears in West Hollywood.
Santa Monica.
Yeah, you go to those cities and, well, they don't have money coming out of their ears now, but that's a whole other story. So sometimes you have to spend money to make money, right? A clean, well-maintained city that has a vibrant, cultural scene. The trees are trimmed. The property values are going to increase. The sales tax is going to increase. People are going to want to shop there. So there's other ways to create ways to balance the budget, but those are much longer term. The mayor's dedicated to making this a more business-friendly city, and one of the ways of doing that is to pay our bills on time to the people who we do business with, especially the local ones. But if we have fewer people to pay the bills, it's going to be much harder to get them paid on time.
A couple of thoughts. One is in terms of fees, I think we're going to see an increase in our trash fee, the solid waste recovery fee, because it hasn't been raised since 2009. That was under Villaraigosa. Of course, Villaraigosa had 3 ones, increased when 2006 to 2009 went from $11 to $36. So people are probably still screaming about that. But that's running short. I think they're down $130 million a year. So we can probably figure that they're going to come back to us, and probably rightfully so. But they need to show why they need it. I think a second one we're going to get another increase in fees is going to be the sewer fee. The sewer fund was drained, no pun intended, was drained this year, And I think, there's going to be, so there's not as much money there. I think the second thing is there are going to be a lot of environmental aspects to it. It's just the sewer, what are you going to do with all the wastewater? Is that going to start to be recycled? They're going to put it into Hyperion. I mean, there's all sort, I think there's a recycling plant up north in the valley someplace. But so you're going to have the pressure on those fees. So we'll be seeing that shortly. The other question is, do we have any other tax increases? Will the city have another bond issue similar to HHH? And then we have a sales tax that's trying to be proposed through an initiative for the Measure H, a quarter-cent tax, and they want to turn that to a half a cent and make it permanent. Well,
Which is
we'll see.
countywide.
Countywide, but we'll see if that makes it to the thing. So you have a lot of pressure on doing a lot of things, and I think you can pretty much count on the fees for the sewer and for the trash. I think another thing, Rick, and this sort of gets into LA is sort of a tale of two cities. You have sort of downtown, the business district downtown, and I think unfortunately there's a lot of vacancies. And then you come to Century City and the West Side. They're still building stuff up over there, and for new office buildings when the vacancy factor downtown is like 25%. And so and this is the tale of two cities tends to see itself politically in terms of equity. You're saying, well, you got all these guys in the Palisades and Beverly Hills, and that's not a part of the city, Brentwood and Hancock Park, and all these out in certain places in the valley, and then you have South LA and you got East LA, and that are their populations, it's just vastly different. So when Nuri Martinez, when she was saying, I mean, she was big on equity, and we're seeing that at the Department of Water and Power.
So is Monica Rodriguez.
Yeah,
That's
and
raises
and
frequently as well.
yeah, and so you're in a situation which are they getting the same services? Take for example trees. If you fly into Los Angeles, I live in the Windsor Square Hancock Park area. We're this oasis of green. Then you start going to the west side, and then when you hit the east side, looking out the window, it's nothing but nothing but buildings, and it's very different. So when they say let's plant 1 million trees, where are they going to go? And then when you start to put them in, who's going to maintain them? I mean, trees need to be maintained.
Back to the original question. How do we balance the budget by growing revenue? There's two ways. One is for you to pay more, and the other is for the economy to grow and for the city to reap the benefits of a growing, prosperous city.
Yeah. Next, okay.
Yeah, sure. So the next one is, Rick, you had mentioned that there are two budgets. And so here's the question that came in: since all departments have two budgets and the city of Los Angeles budget draft is 12.8 billion, what is the Los Angeles second budget?
No, it's really within that. So it's a good question, and I don't mean to suggest it's they missed something. We didn't provide the full context. Jack mentioned the general fund, which is about what is it this year?
Call it 8 billion for round numbers.
Yeah,
7.9.
Yeah, 7.9 billion. And that includes the two budgets for departments, in the sense there aren't really two budgets, but there's two places where you find the budget for that department within that $8 billion budget. So you'll find the operating number for the department, but that does not include the pensions, which is also in the budget, but it's between about a $5 billion operating set of department budgets, and then there's another $3 billion that's within the general fund. Then on top of that, there's a whole series of other funds that don't include the DWP, don't include the airport, and don't include the port. Those are not part of the $12.8 billion budget. They have their own budgets. But within the 12.8, there's the general fund, which is basically funded by tax money that can be used for anything. And between that 8 billion and the 12.4 billion,
Oh,
excuse me, thank you, 12.8 billion, that extra almost $5 billion, that's the money that we, the voters or the legislature or the city council, have earmarked for things that can only be spent there. So one of those is the library. 10 years ago, the voters of Los Angeles wrote into the city charter that the library gets its own budget. Why? Because the library was getting cut. And people said, well, let's take the library out of the regular budget so it can't be cut. So that's separate over and above the general fund. There's also gas tax money, which I mentioned earlier. Gas tax can't be spent on police salaries. Gas tax can't be spent on library books. Gas tax can't be spent to have people mow the lawns at a recreation center. So it can only be spent on streets and sidewalks. So the gas tax is not in the general fund, and the money we spend to fix those streets and roads, that's over and above from where we get gas tax. It costs more than the gas tax provides. So this is where it gets complicated. And it would be what I probably said too oversimplistically is departments have two budgets. The city doesn't have two budgets. The city has lots of budgets, but the main budget is the mayor's budget, and that includes lots and lots of other budgets within her overall budget. I probably have confused people more than I've helped them understand, but it can be confusing.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask a question that I think is of general interest to this particular audience. And that is, can we have a little discussion about what the neighborhood council and the done budgets are for the new fiscal year?
let me, in terms of we've had the business of whether the neighborhood councils are going to get 30 or 32,000. In this budget, the amount that's going this year is basically the same as last year. It might be up a little bit more because there's more neighborhood councils, but don't, we're going to be stuck at 30 or 32, whatever it is. It ain't going back to 50.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna take two questions that came in through the Q&A and ask them at the same time. So one question is, if you don't eliminate positions like the auditor positions, how do you recommend that those positions be retained and still balance the budget? That's one of them, and then it's also related. So if the mayor recommends no hiring, what's the alternative? I'm sure the city has been through this in the past.
Yeah. So it's a good question, fair question. We would like to we've asked the budget committee to restore funding for 12 of the 27 positions that are being eliminated in this budget. So we're not asking for the world. These are positions that we have that were filled recently and now are vacant because people have retired or gotten promotions. So in a budget of 12.8 billion dollars, or the general fund budget of 8 billion, 1.8 million is really a rounding error. It's a tiny amount of money, and yet it will provide services to every single department, right? Because every single department relies on us for their payroll. Every single department relies on us to pay their bills. Every single department relies on us to keep track of their budget and their accounting. So we recognize that the sacrifices have to be made. We recommend not eliminating the remaining 15 jobs, but simply not funding them. That's what we do in the police department, because we don't have the ability to fill all of the positions the mayor would like to have, because there's just not enough people applying and too many people retiring. There are positions that are authorized, but they're not funded because there's nobody there to pay. So we have said, don't eliminate these jobs. And maybe over time we do eliminate 15 jobs, but not necessarily those 15 jobs. So maybe next year, one of the jobs that's less important comes up, we eliminate that. Next year, we eliminate that. So our goal is to actually, we're not spending more money than last year. We have a real cut, even though we will have to pay our people more. So we recognize the position the city's in, but in order to fulfill our basic functions, we're asking for really a very, very small amount of money in the larger scheme of the city's budget. But to my earlier challenge, right, you'd have to find that $1.8 million somewhere else. But there's a lot of other places in the city that aren't as central as payroll and payments and accounting, which serve, the city cannot function without all three of those working effectively.
One of the things that has concerned me is what I'll call the city's infrastructure departments. And Rick, you talked about payroll and cutting checks and doing, getting the accounting done. I think the same thing applies to personnel, where people are going to want to hire, and in the past, they decimated the personnel department. And when it came time to hire, there was nobody there to process it. And we can argue that there's a little bit, the civil service is a little too bureaucratic for its own good. That's a completely different argument. The other department that I think is
as long
very
as we have it, we need to, we're stuck with it, and
oh yeah.
So if we it's one of the things we should change, but until we change it, we're hamstrung if we don't adequately fund it.
I think another one of these departments is IT. I mean, you need the
information technology for those who are not in on the
right. You need management information systems that, just to manage, an operation. And some of these, like Public Works has 5,000 people in them. It's a $2 billion budget. That's an enterprise in and of itself, and it has to have some way to figure out what's going on. I would also say, there's two other areas that, from my perspective, are very important. One's the CAO, and the other's the CLA. And I think those are sort of, I don't want to say watchdog, but they help determine the policies. And quite frankly, I think they're two of the most honest agencies. And I've worked with them, over the last 10 or 15 years as I've been moaning and groaning. I think I found them to be very reliable. And I think weakening those departments, the basic infrastructure is a serious concern.
Well, I think this would be helpful in answer to that very relevant question of, okay, you say you'd like some more people, how do you pay for it? In 2008-9, because our years are not calendar years, they're fiscal years. They go from July 1st to June 30th. So the year before the Great Recession hit, if you go and look at that budget, we had 187 positions in the controller's office. Now we have 167. So we're 20 down from where we were 15 years ago. And if this budget is adopted, we'll be at 140, which is essentially a 25% reduction in the number of people doing the work since 2008. If you just gave us the money by inflation, we would get another $4.5 million in our operating budget. If you just gave us the money that would be our share, if we had the same share of the government that we had 15 years ago, we'd have an extra $9 million and change over and above our operating budget. So in real terms, the support functions of the city have been hollowed out. They've been hollowed out of personnel. They've been hollowed out of dollars, and we think that's short-sighted. And I agree with Jack. I think that's true of information technology. It's also true of general services, who provide things like gassing the cars and servicing the trucks and doing all of the things that clean the janitorial, all the stuff that nobody pays much attention to. All of those things have been really hollowed out, and we think it's short-sighted, and means that the departments themselves, animal services, the zoo, the library, they suffer because their place is dirtier or it's harder to get their bills paid, etc.
I want to bring up another topic, and that's going to be Department of Recreation and Parks. Like the library, the Rec and Parks is charter mandated funding, and the formula is 0.00325%. For those of you can figure out how you do the math on that, but it comes up to be about $290 million. And then there's a bunch of other revenues, whether it rates to, another, I don't know, 30 or $40 million. The problem that Rec and Parks has is that when the city was going through the crunch during the Great Recession, the city put in this thing called full cost accounting. And basically, since these were charter funded, they said, okay, we're going to charge you for stuff, and they're charging, for these what I'll call related costs. It's pensions and it's medical benefits and various other things. Department of Recreation and Parks also pays its own utility bills, unlike any other department other than the library. So that's $30 million a year, and then the CAO puts in sort of an overhead charge, and last year it was $64 million. So the Rec and Parks is kicking back $100 million of this $286 million that's charter amended. This year, the CAO is going from $64 million to $91 million, a $27 million bump, and I'm sure they have some way to adjust it. But so Rec and Parks is probably paying a disproportionate amount of the shortfall, and where that $27 million comes from. The other thing that sort of bugged me is when they put this in, we were assured, oh, not a problem. When the city revenues bounce back, we'll fully fund it. Well, the city revenues have, gone from, or the general funds have gone from about $4 or $5 billion to, almost $8 billion. And Rec and Parks hasn't seen a dime. Plus, they just had a whole bunch of positions eliminated. So that's sort of one of my pet peeves with regards to Rec and Parks, which, it's charter mandated for a reason. And the library is charter mandated for a reason.
We should probably keep our answers much shorter so we can squeeze in a few more. I hope that for all of the 40 folks who are on here, who are obviously paying close attention and wanting to learn more so that you can be effective advocates for your neighborhoods and for the city as a whole. We are two people who are immersed in this, but these are our opinions. Not asking anyone to accept them at face value. What I hope that we've contributed over the last hour is just some additional insights that can help you come to your own conclusions about where you want to advocate and how. So let's see if we can keep our answers short, and we'll get through a few more before we wind up.
Yeah, we're definitely running out of time. So here's one. How can the city have a better system for having a business in Los Angeles, like one-stop approvals, use, parking, ADA, etc.? We've talked about this for years, but is anyone listening?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is other cities that are smaller cities have moved in that direction. Not all, but the more sophisticated, well-funded cities. And I think part of the problem is with 17% vacancy, most departments are spending all of their time keeping their nose above the water and don't have time to think about how to fix the problems. They're so busy mired in the problems and falling further and further behind that they don't have the time and the bandwidth to actually prevent the problems and go to a better system. I think that's very frustrating for the public, but it's also frustrating for those of us who work for the city. We would like to improve the way we do business, but we are just struggling every day to keep our nose above the waterline. When you have 1 out of 5 people who are not there to do the work. That makes it really hard on the 4 people who are still there.
Yeah. One other thing on business, we have the business tax or the gross receipts tax. And that's I think we're a little bit higher than the rest of some of the surrounding cities, and I think it's just high generally. And I can speak from a personal point of view. Our company had just a war with the city over this because we had we had a small operation, relatively speaking, here in Los Angeles, and we had a lot of stuff outside of the state and other parts of the states, and they just busted our chops for a couple of years. And finally, after a while, you just say, we're going to fight. We're not going to pay it, and we move jobs out of town. We're just not, just not worth it. And and we moved them to other parts of Los Angeles County, and we also moved them out of state. Next question.
Yeah, okay. So does the mayor's proposed budget include anything for better monitoring of services and delivery?
No, again, we have 6 auditors. I think we're now up to 7 auditors for a city with 40 departments and $13 billion worth of spending. And that's an area where we could really invest in and save money in the long run.
Can you hire outside auditors?
If you have money, but we don't
Okay.
have money in our budget to do that either. We do have some, but it's a third of what it used to be.
Okay, here's another one. LAPD has been unable to fill the rookie classes with anywhere near capacity to train. I believe they have a capacity of 60 recruits per class. Recent classes are running in the mid-20s per class. What is being done to correct this problem?
Well, that was the main argument for raising salaries across the board, right? Which go from rookie cops all the way up to the police chief, him or herself. And we're investing an extra $1 billion of taxpayer money over the next 4 years in higher salaries for the police department, period. That does not seem to have made a big dent, although the mayor says we have more applicants than we've had in the past, but they have to then go through background checks, and sometimes by the time that's all over, they've already gotten a job somewhere else, or they've flunked out of our background checks. So we'll see whether the classes go up in future years. The mayor's doing a lot of different things and the police department doing a lot of different things to attract people. We're not persuaded that money is the root cause here. Police work across the country has become tougher and under more scrutiny. Much of it justified in the wake of some of what's come out since people started filming what happens out on our streets. But it is a tough job to be a police officer today, and not everybody wants to take on that job.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna ask this question here. A couple of questions came in focused on youth. Are there funds for youth housing? Is one of them, and another one is, can we get cooperation with President Biden for some way for Los Angeles to help fund AmeriCorps programs that mentor kids?
The city's ability to garner grants is something I think is improving under Mayor Bass. She's a veteran of Washington. She knows President Biden and the cabinet secretaries and the way Washington works. And she was in Sacramento as well. So I think she's going to be very focused on this, and youth is a priority. In terms of youth housing, there's a whole complicated structure for figuring out how to fund new affordable housing, whether it's for seniors, whether it's for youth, whether it's for people who are recovering from mental illness, whether it's for veterans. And a lot of different funding formulas that are sometimes pretty convoluted and complex and take a long time to actually get the money, even if it's there. So I don't know a specific answer to whether LA has made a priority of housing for young people. I do know, I think we all know, that a disproportionate number of homeless people are young people who are coming out of the foster youth system. They've had trauma that got them into the foster youth system. Sometimes they've suffered trauma in the foster youth experience, and then they age out, and they often do not have the family support to get them on their feet. Even people with stable families have a hard time launching their kids these days because housing is so expensive.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question. So during the rainy season, 2023, there were lots of claims filed regarding street sewers, reversing back into private properties. And the landlords were advised, or the property owners were advised, to get an attorney. However, not all of them really have the funds to hire an attorney. So that was the end of the conversation. So the sewer system was fixed. But then the property owners were still trying to repair the damage caused by the sanitation department. And I mean, is there any solution to a situation like this?
I think it's actually going to get worse with climate change. Jack made the point that the sewer fund has been drained. We're going to have to invest in a more robust sewer system for the city, and climate change is going to mean more extreme weather events. So this is one of those long-term costs that we are going to have to get our arms around, because we don't. It's a catastrophe to have it happen in your home, and of course it's a financial disaster for cleaning up afterwards, whether it falls on the landlord or the tenant or the homeowner. And if it's the city's fault, then it's going to land on the taxpayer.
Yeah, or we had the problem down at Hyperion, where we had the overflows, went out into the bay, and the people in El Segundo are probably suing the hell out, I would imagine, suing the hell out of the city on that. So
yeah, I want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I hope we have been helpful, and you can always reach out to me, rick.cole@lacity.org. I'll repeat that, rick.cole@lacity.org. Pretty simple. I'll try to answer any questions, or at least point you in the direction where you can get an answer.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank you, Rick and Jack, for this enlightening discussion. I want to thank everybody who attended today for joining us. I want to make it clear that we did invite the mayor's budget team to participate in this discussion, but they have so much budget work that they were just unavailable. And I want to also remind everybody that we look forward to seeing you on the morning of June 15th at Budget Day at City Hall. Registration information will be available soon. Follow us on social media and at budgetadvocates.org for more information. Thank you very much.
And if you can, save the chat. We put some resources in there for you, including links to the new budget council file, and also to the city clerk's contribution form, so that your neighborhood council can make contributions to neighborhood council budget day. And thank you. And this recording will be posted on our website, budgetadvocates.org. So thanks again, everyone.
La vista.